Thank you for inviting me to be in this panel, and happy to meet old and new faces online, and also, yeah, online. I'm not there in person. I'd like to say at the outset that overshoot should not be seen as inevitable nor as a default framing in any multilateral discussions that aim to address the challenges posed by the climate chaos, the climate crisis, and the environmental crisis. All efforts should focus in avoiding an overshoot, yes, keeping the global average temperature below 1.5 C as committed by the international community. Serious mitigation and adaptation efforts must focus on ensuring deep emission cuts as part of the commitment of the global north and supporting proven and tested approaches that would not aggravate the multiple crises in biodiversity, environment, and climate change, and would not exacerbate inequalities in power and wealth between the north and south and within countries. Any decision to look into CDR and SRM as options for addressing the climate crisis, whether or not that's within overshoot discussions, is a political decision. A desperate move that reeks of acceptance of defeat, as Kaveh pointed out in his opening. Choosing to believe promises and illusions that technological fixes such as geoengineering, SRM and CDM, SRM and CDR, can save us from the road to hell over deep cuts in emissions and economy-wide transformation, because techno fixes are cheaper than this transformation, and also less politically costly, and also choosing these options over proven and tested approaches and technologies from the bottom up, such as agroecology, renewables, etc., is a political decision that should involve accountability to peoples. CDR, in order to be relevant in policymaking, should not gloss over what scale are we talking about that would make any impact at all on reducing warming, in stabilizing the climate. CDR is not scale neutral, never scale neutral. The scale of deployment, including outdoor experiments of CDR, would have implications on the environment, people's livelihoods, diplomacy, conflict, etc. The impacts of CDR, even more so of SRM, on the environment, biodiversity, land use, food security, food sovereignty, livelihoods, and communities should be front and center in any decision that would lead us to the root of geoengineering in any country. Many of these impacts are transboundary by nature. We have a number of examples from the region. For example, the Sulusi ocean fertilization experiment in 2007-2008, which actually straddles between Malaysia and the Philippines. And that was a rogue experiment by scientists from the University of Sydney that was squashed by the Philippine government, raised to the CBD, that led to the adoption of the moratorium on ocean fertilization under the Convention on Biodiversity, just to cite an example. Governance is a fundamental discussion in both CDR and SRM. Who decides how that governance would look like and how that will allow or enable involvement of people in general, and especially potentially impacted communities? Assumptions that governance of CDR is adequately covered by the UNFCCC need to be interrogated, because that is really flawed. At the regional level, questions like, do existing governance mechanisms already exist in Asia Pacific to deal with transboundary impacts of large-scale CDR? Would existing governance mechanisms or structures work, like the ASEAN mechanism that was put in motion during the severe haze episodes 15 years ago? Are there existing and future governance mechanisms linked at all to the overall adaptation and mitigation approaches that actually straddles among departments, between agencies in any national bureaucracy, or even within the bureaucracy of ASEAN in Southeast Asia, or the bureaucracy of ESCAP in that level where Kaveh is? Do they at all take into account and respect outstanding commitments of countries in the region in other multilateral agreements, such as the CBD and the London Convention, London Protocol on Ocean Dumping, which actually have outstanding moratorium on ocean fertilization and climate geoengineering as a whole? On SRM, and this may be true as well in some CDR technologies, there are serious concerns that go beyond the sphere of climate and environment in which these discourses are mostly happening. such as the security implications on fragile relationship between some states that could exacerbate conflicts, such as in the case of India and Pakistan, if any of them would decide to go take SRM as an option, as that fiction delved in, no? The Ministry of the Future delved in. I'm sure the ambassador has read that. And that could also exacerbate other conflicts, existing conflicts over hydrological management in the region, such as the Mekong countries, now the Indochina area. Discussions and decisions on benefits need to happen within the region and must involve people in the region, informed by science-based evidence and experiences of people, and taking into account the concrete realities in the region. Risk analysis as a lens in considering SRM and CDR as an option is not a given and should not be imposed on the region and its people who are already currently and severely impacted by the adverse impacts of climate change. It is easy for those whose houses and livelihoods are not inundated by severe flooding year after year to say that not doing anything or status quo is more risky than taking desperate measures such as geoengineering. All of the above points apply to both CDR and SRM in general, but more deeply political and has regional and strategic dimensions, and strategic dimensions for SRM because of the inherent risk involved, the unequal impacts, which was mentioned by our IPCC colleague, termination shock, and the dangers of unilateral deployment. Governance framework for SRM requires more than what are needed for adaptation and mitigation actions that may or may include CDR, in view of the nature and inherent risk involved that go far beyond the existing governance framework around climate change in most countries. SRM would have unequal and uneven impacts, which may be true for some CDR technologies as well, and the scale needed to have that it needs to have any impact in stabilizing the temperature. Lastly, who bears the cost and will be accountable for the damages, increased risk, unforeseen consequences of geoengineering of CDR and SRM? Who will pay? Is it going to be the companies that develop and deploy these technologies? Is it going to be the governments on the table who make the decision? Is it going to be the UN who will pay? What price tag are we going to put on those who will end up as losers in the unequal game involved in SRM?